report published by Politico on Tuesday exposes leaked text messages that allegedly come from members of the Young Republicans organization. The report shows messages that were sent in a private group chat on the messaging app Telegram.
It shows leaders of various Young Republicans groups making jokes about slavery, sexual assault, and the Holocaust. The report says, quote, mixed into formal conversations about whipping votes, social media strategy, and logistics, the members of the chat slung around an array of slurs. It goes on to say that various slurs and racial epithets were used more than 250 times in the group chat.
Young Republicans have more than 15,000 members nationwide between 18 and 40 years old. Their website states that their mission is to engage young voters with the Republican Party, train the future leaders of the United States, and elect Republican candidates from the top to the bottom of the ballot across the country.
Following the report, the Young Republicans Board of Directors posted a statement on X. It says, quote, we are appalled by the vile and inexcusable language revealed in the Politico article published today. Such behaviour is disgraceful, unbecoming of any Republican, and stands in direct opposition to the values our movement represents. Those involved must immediately resign from all positions within their state and local Young Republican organisations. We must hold ourselves to the highest standards of integrity, respect and professionalism. Reactions have been pouring in on social media. Democratic strategist Jessica Tarloff writes, quote, when someone shows you who they are, believe them.
But many on the right are bringing up the recent scandal involving Jay Jones, the Virginia Democrat who is running for Attorney General. Private texts from Jones were recently exposed where he wishes for violence on his political rivals. Vice President J.D. Vance compared the two scandals, writing that Jones's text messages are, quote, far worse than anything said in a college group chat, and the guy who said it could become the AG of Virginia. I refuse to join the pearl clutching when powerful people call for political violence. And Thomas Hearn, former director at Turning Point USA, says several young Republicans made crass racist jokes in a group chat, and they have faced widespread condemnation. The Democrat AG candidate for Virginia said he wanted to assassinate his political opponents and has faced no calls to drop out from his party. The left has no shame.
So I don't really see why people just can't condemn both things, honestly. I mean, the AG candidate, I wouldn't defend what he wrote. What he wrote was pretty vile, and it was, it was certainly calling, rhetorically or otherwise for violence. But what these conservative guys were writing about was also massively offensive, obvious racism, obvious sexism, some anti-Semitic stuff. I mean, basically a whole checklist of all the prejudices that people can express were being expressed here. And it's vile stuff, and they should be condemned for it too.
Yeah, no, I definitely don't condone what they said. And I think there's actually a interesting trend on some circles on the right among young people where I think they felt so oppressed in a way by politically correct culture that they really deign to push the boundaries of what is acceptable and be edgy for edginess sake as a way of expressing some sort of like twisted sense of freedom. At least that's what I think psychologically is going on here, and that's not to excuse the behavior. I do think it is reasonable to compare the reaction, meaning that the individuals involved in this have either lost their jobs or been stopped from being hired from certain jobs that they were pursuing and have been asked to leave the organization, whereas no one who is running alongside Jay Jones or any Democrat in Virginia has called for him to drop out of the race or revoked their endorsement. So it really is a tale of two scandals here and the varying responses, one which we would expect and I think is the just response, which is to condemn the messages and say that they should face consequences for their actions, versus another which is, well, what he said was bad, but really democracy's on the ballot and we know his character, so we're not going to pull our endorsement.
So to get back to the first part that you mentioned, which is the idea that these guys in the Republicans chat were sort of acting in a transgressive way against what they considered oppressive social norms. I think that that is a thing that psychologically can happen, and people do it, and stand-up comics do that sort of thing regularly. But that to me, I mean, you still, even if that is the psychological pattern of what you're doing, you still have to understand that there are certain lines of basic decency or basic lack of prejudice. And I know you weren't defending what they wrote, but to get into the element of racial slurs or homophobic slurs, or somebody suggesting in one of those chats that Jewish people are inherently untrustworthy, that's just gross and prejudiced and bigoted behaviour. And whether they felt oppressed by political correctness or not, it's still gross and prejudiced and bigoted behaviour. The J. Jones thing, I think that there should be more forthright condemnation. I think that both ethically and politically. In other words, I think that the thing itself deserved to be condemned. I also think the people running alongside him have not done themselves any favours by obfuscating on that point, because I think people understandably feel that it should be condemned in a more forthright manner. Now, I was away while some of this broke. Some Democrats outside of Virginia did condemn it, I think. It's the people who aren't running alongside him who have failed to do so.
Yes,
Is that right?
there are people who condemned. I think the problem is that you have a candidate who is running to be the top cop in Virginia and yet has not only called for violence against his political opponent and wishing for the death of his children. But in that conversation, what was especially disturbing was that he realized he was texting the wrong person, and instead of apologizing and saying, I shouldn't have said that, he actually called her to double down and explain why he thought political violence was justified, and then continued in text messages to triple down again on the idea that his political opponent's kids should suffer death in their mother's arms so that he might be compelled to change his political positions. That person is totally unworthy of being attorney general or really any political official who is in charge of having to oversee policy decisions for people on the side of the aisle that he has wished death upon. And not a single Democrat has pulled their endorsement or said that he should drop out of the race. And in fact, Abigail Spanberger, who is his running mate, who is running for governor, is continuing to sell merchandise on her website featuring his name prominently on T-shirts and signs.
Okay, I didn't know that last part, but overall, I would not defend the behaviour that you're talking about. I don't mean I wouldn't defend. I don't only mean I wouldn't defend him. I wouldn't defend the attempts to minimise what he did or what he said. I think that that's both dumb and unethical, and given the position for which he's running. I mean, this is the danger, I think, when, not to sound too sort of high and noble about it, but this is the danger, I think, when you let partisanship dictate your views too obviously. Because in that sort of instance, then what happens the next time there is a Republican running for high office and that person is caught either wishing for violence or saying something completely objectionable, then Democrats will presumably protest about that, and Conservatives will say, well, what about J. Jones? You didn't do it then.
And I think that's exactly what's happening with this group chat.
Yeah.
Because people say, on the right, are looking at this and saying, well, there's been no consequences for J. Jones. These are young people who, obviously said grotesque and offensive things in this group chat. They didn't wish for the death of their political opponents. They didn't fantasize about children dying in Democrats' arms, and were presumably making jokes. Obviously, that doesn't make it okay, but they're saying, well, are we going to destroy the lives of these young people when we have Democrats actively running for office who have been embraced by their political friends and nothing's happening to them? And so it does feel very one-sided. And I would also throw out the example of when Melissa Hortman was tragically murdered by this individual in Minnesota. There was a resolution in Congress to memorialize her. And it passed unanimously. Every single politician in Congress signed on to this resolution. Now, comparably, when there was the Charlie Kirk resolution, who was also the victim of a political assassination, there were hundreds of Democrats who refused to sign. And so it does feel like Republicans are constantly trying to rise above the fray and do what is ethical and correct in these cases. And there's no similar response from the left.
Well, let me go back to what you said a moment ago about the Republicans in this chat where there's the racist and homophobic and other offensive commentary about, like, are we going to destroy the lives of the people who do this? There are and should be consequences for what you say. Now, they shouldn't, unless what you say is actively criminal, they shouldn't generally be government consequences. But if you or I said blatantly racist things and those things became public, we would suffer consequences for that.
This is true.
And I don't see that it is unjust that we would suffer consequences from it. So I think where we do perhaps disagree, at least in terms of where we put the emphasis here, is I think that what Jay Jones said and texted was wrong, and I wouldn't defend it. I also wouldn't use it to exculpate the young Republicans who are saying racist things, which is also wrong. And I'm not saying you did that, but like the J.D. Vance thing about pearl clutching, well, is it, I mean, he's the Vice President of the United States. Should he not more assertively condemn racist and sexist slurs rather than diminish people who object to them by suggesting that they're engaged in pearl clutching?
Yeah, I guess it's really highlighting a double standard in that a lot of the same people who are condemning the chat are so quick to call for the excommunication of these young people from political life do not hold people in their own party to that standard. And so it feels like it's very performative or meant to basically damage a young Republican group as opposed to actually doing it for the sake of upholding certain moral ethic values.
Yeah. Yes, but then the same argument can be made in reverse, no? That someone like Vance is trying to get the young Republicans off the hook while condemning the Democrat. I mean, I think this is why the debate about this becomes often so sort of, well, it doesn't go anywhere, really.
Right. I won't speak for J.D. Vance, but I think probably what he's getting at is that he probably feels, and I feel this way sometimes too, that Republicans will very quickly condemn people within their party that go outside of the lines. And when you do that repeatedly and you don't really get any grace from the left for, or really applause from the left for doing that, it's like, well, why bother? Why is this my role now if people don't even take me seriously? I mean, just to provide further context, I had actually something similar happen to me when I was in high school. I was dating a Jewish individual, and we would sometimes send jokes to each other, edgy jokes as a way of sort of picking on each other. So he would send me jokes about my Catholic faith, and I would send jokes about his Jewish faith. And those were leaked later, years later, or not leaked rather, but they were highlighted years later by Media Matters in an attempt to suggest that I was anti-Semitic and were used to try to ruin my career. And I apologized for it because it was the right thing to do, and the jokes were offensive, and I understood that they hurt people. And the response from the people who were trying to destroy me was not, we accept your apology, thank you for doing that. It was, well, you work for the Daily Caller, so you're still an anti-Semite, and this means, your apology means nothing. And so when people get battered with that message over and over again from their political opponents, it's just like, well, what's the point of apologizing if you're just going to continue to hold it over my head and view actually the apology itself as a form of weakness?
Yeah. No, I think that we could do with a bit more grace in those kinds of moments, and I think that would be better. But otherwise, I shall let you have the last word there.
Appreciate
Amber.
it.
The DOJ is under fire for asking a major social media platform to take down content. We'll be right back to discuss that. Stay with us.